Hidden in the deserts of Kazakhstan, far away from any civilization, lies a Soviet-modeled construction that resembles a base. This was a top-secret project named Buran that was used for making a Soviet space shuttle. Making a reusable spacecraft for military and reconnaissance purposes was a big goal for the Soviets, one that they would never fully accomplish. The project idea wasn't originally made by the Soviets. It was stolen based on gathered intelligence from the United States documents who started developing a space shuttle program a few years prior. Based on the intelligence that was gathered, the Soviets wanted to make their own space shuttle that was far more superior. The Soviets started their first reusable space shuttle project in 1962. The space shuttle was given the name Spiral Orbiter and was intended to be a multitask spacecraft that would put the Soviet Union ahead in the space race. This spacecraft was planned to have 8 thrusters and to have rotating wings that would help the spacecraft re-enter orbit easier. This was made as an offensive weapon made under the watchful eye of the Soviet military, which was much involved in the production and planning. The Spiral Orbiter had 3 goals: reconnaissance, attacking, and intercepting. Reconnaissance was to be carried out with high-resolution cameras that would film other spacecraft marked as possible threats. Attacking tasks considered bombing targets. The bombing was to be performed on the targets that were in flight or on the ground. The last task was intercepting objects in space. This was meant to be a defensive mechanism of the spacecraft. The Spiral Orbiter was never built despite enormous efforts by the Soviet government and their expert staff. The military bureau that designed the famous MiG jet was also involved in making the Spiral Orbiter, but there was no success. There were just 3 models made and tested, but none of them were successful. One even weighed 1.5 tons and never showed results that would be considered useful. Due to the high cost and complex nature of the planning process, the project was terminated in 1978. The Spiral program was implemented into a new program named BOR. The program continued developing and testing spacecrafts in the 1980s, but under the name Buran. That is when the USSR leaders and military personnel realized it's easier to steal ideas that were already worked on than to develop their own original plans. That intelligence was to become a base for the Buran program. It was made official that the US was building a space shuttle in 1972. This was interpreted as a great threat by the USSR. It is no secret that they thought that this was a military action by the US targeted against them. The Soviet leadership interpreted these potential threats very seriously and wanted to start a military space program that could be matched for the one announced in the US. The threat was widely overestimated. Chairman of the USSR Communist Party, Leonid Brezhnev, sat down with the head of the Soviet Union's Military-Industrial Commission, Vladimir Smirnov, to discuss further defensive plans. After that meeting, it became apparent to the Soviet leadership that there needed to be an answer to the spacecraft developments made in the US. One thing that the Soviet engineers discovered is that they would need years to make a similar spacecraft, and that wouldn't be cost-efficient. Besides the cost, there were not enough scientists and engineers to lead such an ambitious program. Therefore, the Soviets decided to steal plans from NASA and use them to develop their space shuttle. That is when the Buran program started. The Soviet Union was frightened to be left behind by the US because of their progress to develop a fully functioning space shuttle. Therefore, the Soviets started the Buran program in 1974 at the Central Aero Hydrodynamic Institute. The goal of the program was to develop a spacecraft that would be reusable and military efficient. Then they started with intelligence gathering. Even though it could have very big repercussions, the theft itself was very easy to pull off. Soviet spies simply requested the documents from government offices in the US because they were open to the public. One more method they used was to infiltrate computers at universities and research facilities where they could gather valuable information. Data gathering was a success because of early computer programs that helped to go through thousands of document pages relatively easily. This is considered one of the first cases of cyber espionage and government hacking. The theft turned out to be a big success for the Soviets, both economically and practically. The USSR was able to save billions of dollars on the development of its space shuttle program. The practical aspect is that the USSR saved so much time on the development and testing that they wouldn't have if the circumstances were different. A report made by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency estimated that the USSR saved years of development by stealing the documents. The shuttle's construction began in 1980, and the first test flight was made in June 1983. The spacecraft that was tested had a code name, BOR-5, and it was a self-piloted aircraft. This testing was considered a successful one, and the Soviets would carry on to have 25 more tests until 1988. All of the further testings would be carried out by the OKGLI testing vehicle. The vehicle was also known as Buran Aerodynamic Analog. It was constructed in 1984. The Buran Aerodynamic Analog spacecraft itself was very big and heavy. The spacecraft was launched from landing strips designed for airplanes, and the procedure for liftoff was not that much different. The difference was in the landing process, because the engines would stop working at a specific altitude. That helped the spacecraft glide down on the landing strip. The precise weight of the spacecraft is unknown. What we do know is that the transportation was very hard due to its massive size and weight. It was done by the Antonov AN-225, the largest airplane in the world. Testing took place until 1988, which allowed the Soviets to construct their first and only space shuttle. It got the name K-1, also known as the Buran rocket. It was launched on November 15 at around 3 from Kazakhstan's Baikonur Cosmodrome. The Buran's launch was a big success for the Soviets as the spacecraft made 2 orbits around the Earth and returned. The success is also measured by the fact that this was the first unpiloted space shuttle that took off and landed completely automatically. The landing was near perfect with a minimal deviation for the starting position. The total time in space was 206 minutes, which means the spacecraft returned around 6:25 a.m. The Buran rocket had a different ignition system from the U.S. space shuttle. The U.S. space shuttle was more independent and used 3 integrated engines and rocket boosters, which made it a craft that can be fully flown. The Buran was attached to a special rocket called the Energia that would detach when it reached orbit. The Energia rocket had 4 engines attached to it and had a power of 170 million horsepower. This was much stronger than Columbia's engines. The second difference between the Buran and the U.S. space shuttle was the usage of pilots and crew. The U.S. space shuttle needed to have a crew on board to pilot it, while Buran was a self-piloted spacecraft designed to land on its own. It was projected for the Buran to have another flight around 1993. This project was even more ambitious because it considered a much longer flight without a crew. It was planned to take up to 20 days, but the project was never realized. The Soviet Union experienced a rapid recession in the 1980s, and the funding had to be stripped from the project that wasn't considered a priority. One of those programs was Buran. Officially, the Soviet Union never terminated the Buran program, but it just didn't put any serious funds into it. That is the reason why the program survived the fall of the USSR in 1991. Even though the program continued until 1993, no more spacecraft were launched into space. Russian President Boris Yeltsin was the one who terminated the program, and from that moment on, all of the spacecraft were stored in hangars at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The fate of the Buran rocket wasn't so bright. After the program was terminated and all of the spacecraft were left at Baikonur Cosmodrome, the Buran was placed in a special hangar. In 2002, the roof of the hangar collapsed and destroyed the famous Buran rocket. The Buran's legacy remains great even though it made only 1 space flight. Thanks for watching Decode. While you are here, go ahead and click on one of these videos on your screen.